It was a crisp, clear morning in the center of Chicago's financial district, the kind of morning that made the steel and glass towers glitter like daggers catching the sun. In the grand lobby of the Argento Tower, men and women in tailored suits drifted through like precision-engineered gears in a machine, their faces carved with the expressions of practiced indifference. Marble floors gleamed. A scent of espresso and expensive cologne hung in the air. Among them stood a man whose presence challenged everything the building was supposed to represent. Julian Cole stood inside the elevator, his hands folded before him, dark eyes fixed on the glowing numbers above. His tailored charcoal gray suit was sharp, pressed to military perfection, but it wasn't the fabric that set him apart. It was the skin beneath it. Smooth, deep brown proud. He stood there calm, dignified, unmoved by the soft glances and veiled looks cast his way. He knew what they thought. They didn't think he belonged. To them, Julian wasn't part of their world, at least not on the surface. Not in this towering monument of privilege. Not on the top floors where power was traded like currency and legacy was measured in mergers. But they didn't know him. Not really. Julian Cole was the founder and CEO of Aeon Meridian, a multinational holdings firm quietly valued at $3.2 billion. He had walked into boardrooms on every continent, negotiated with world leaders, and bent industries to his will. And now, he was about to disrupt this one. As the elevator stopped on the 47th floor, a man stepped in. White, late 50s, expensive haircut, Harvard tie. His name was Carter Bain. On his heels was a junior analyst, barely out of grad school, trying hard to appear important. Carter looked Julian over once, then smirked. Wrong floor, he muttered with amusement, eyes not leaving Julian's face. It wasn't a question. The analyst beside him chuckled nervously, as though he knew he was supposed to. Julian said nothing. The elevator resumed its climb. The silence inside swelled with tension, yet Julian stood motionless, as though carved from obsidian. His stillness unnerved Carter. A man used to dominance. Carter couldn't read this stranger, couldn't place him. It would have comforted him to think Julian was just a delivery guy who'd gotten confused, but the suit was too fine, the posture too sure. When the doors opened again on the top floor, Carter stepped out with a final glance over his shoulder. He didn't realize Julian was stepping off too, not until the same polished shoes crossed the threshold just behind him. Carter blinked. "You following me now?" he scoffed. Julian offered him nothing, not even a smile. Inside the boardroom, executives were already gathered around a long mahogany table. Coffee in porcelain cups steamed beside folded agendas. Suits shifted in plush leather chairs. Old money faces murmuring about projections and power. And then Julian walked in. Carter's jaw slackened slightly. "What the hell?" he whispered. Julian moved with the composure of someone who not only belonged there, but owned the floor beneath their feet. When he reached the head of the table, he didn't pause. He pulled out the chair meant for the co-chairman of the firm and sat down. The CEO, Elizabeth Worthen, glanced over the rim of her glasses. Mr. Cole," she said evenly. "So glad you could join us. Shall we begin?" Carter stiffened. "Mr. Cole?" He barely heard the introductions that followed. The other executives welcomed Julian like he was an old acquaintance. The firm's general counsel even offered him a smile. Carter felt a cold prickling across the back of his neck. This wasn't just a guest speaker. Julian Cole was an insider deep inside. Carter leaned toward the analyst beside him and whispered, didn't expect him to make it past security. But the analyst didn't laugh this time. Instead, his expression was tight, his eyes on Julian. Carter could feel the shift. Julian didn't say much during the first half of the meeting. He listened, measured, took notes on a sleek black notepad with precise movements. But when the floor opened for insights on global diversification, he stood. His voice was quiet, clear, every syllable wrapped in deliberate calm. Leadership, Julian said, is no longer about posturing. It's not about titles or legacy or dominance. True leadership today is adaptive. It understands the power of inclusion, the strength of cultural intelligence, and the responsibility to innovate, not to replicate. The room was quiet. Carter shifted in his seat. "And where," he interrupted, "have you demonstrated those ideals, Mr. Barbed?" He needed to reassert control. Because it's one thing to speak in aphorisms, but another to execute. Julian didn't flinch. "Aeon Meridian," he replied. "Our cross-continental operations span 4 continents. We've optimized multinational trade routes, driven equity up in post-pandemic markets by 27%, and hold $6.1 billion in managed assets. I've led that company from a 2-man operation to a global enterprise." Silence again. Even the boardroom clock seemed to stop ticking. Carter's face flushed. He clenched his fists beneath the table, invisible to the others. The next major gathering was a quarterly panel on global investment innovation. Carter had lobbied quietly behind the scenes to ensure Julian's keynote was scheduled during a less publicized session. But the strategy backfired. On the day of the event, Julian's session was packed. Standing room only. Cameras rolled. Live stream feeds surged. And when Julian took the stage, he didn't waste time. He spoke of impact, of equity, of ethical expansion. Leadership, he said, is not about how loud you speak, but about how deeply your voice resonates. You do not earn respect by legacy. You earn it by action. Presence is not appearance. It is purpose. The crowd erupted in applause. Backstage, Carter watched the screen with dead eyes. The applause cut deeper than any insult. The final blow came weeks later at the quarterly review meeting. Carter had grown increasingly paranoid. He was convinced Julian was there to poach talent or disrupt temporary strategy. He wasn't prepared for what happened. When Julian stood and revealed that Aeon Meridian had acquired a 42% equity stake in the company, effectively becoming the largest shareholder and holding equal voting power on the board, the room went cold. Carter stared at him, stunned. "You what?" "I believe in the potential of this firm," Julian said simply. "And now I have a seat at the table to help guide it." There was no smugness in his voice, just calm certainty. A vote followed shortly after. The motion passed unanimously. Julian would serve as co-chair. And with that, Carter's empire cracked. What followed was a slow but inevitable unraveling. Journalists dug into Carter's past, unearthing years of exclusionary hiring practices, leaked emails with racial slurs, and a culture of subtle discrimination. Articles ran with brutal headlines: "Boardroom Reckoning," "Bain Era Ends in Scandal," "Diversity Leads, Bigotry Falls," "New Blood, New Ethos." Within 2 months, Carter was quietly removed from the board. There was no grand press release, no golden parachute, just a resignation letter and silence. But that wasn't the end. Months later, Julian passed by a vocational leadership center tucked between an old textile factory and a renovated tech hub. Inside, Carter Bain was speaking to a group of young professionals, none of whom knew his past. He spoke without arrogance, without title. He talked about the failures of leadership built on ego, about what it meant to rebuild. Julian didn't step inside. He didn't need to. The transformation was already underway. Carter Bain had lost everything: his title, his influence, his self-image. But in that loss, something new took root. Humility, understanding, a quiet respect for what he'd never bothered to learn. And as for Julian Cole, he didn't need praise or validation. He had never chased legacy. He had built one by doing what others feared, standing still in the storm, daring the wind to break him. He was a reminder that leadership isn't awarded. It's earned, not with titles, but with truth, with courage, and above all, with the ability to make others see the future even when they're too blind to know it's already here.